Good morning. My name is Annie Gaines. I'm a library consultant here at the Nevada State Library, and today we're going to be talking about virtual reality. What is it? What do we do with it? And why? For a quick and brief definition, virtual reality is an artificial environment that's immersive enough to convince you that you're actually inside of it. Virtual reality resists description, like a dream or a memory. When talking about VR, we often focus on the technology, the plastic and metal bits and bobs that make it up, but the real power of VR is what it can offer, the experience. New forms of media can cause seismic shifts in society. Consider the printing press, or the telegraph, or the internet. But VR isn't just a new form of media. For centuries, we've experienced art at a remove, where images are presented to us and we appreciate them, but we don't really experience them. Now, with the immersion that VR offers, we have the ability to become the art, to be part of a virtual world, or to be someone or something else. Sure, there are some amazing video games in VR, but VR is also being used by soldiers to offer relief from PTSD and by hospital patients to relieve pain. The NBA, NFL, and US Olympic ski teams all use VR to train. A teacher can take a group of art students to the Louvre without leaving the classroom. Real estate agents can show houses in VR, and car manufacturers are using VR both for the car buying experience and for the car design process. Surgeons are using VR to practice and prepare for risky surgeries on infants, working on exact replicas of a tiny patient's heart, virtually before scrubbing in. Through VR documentaries, journalists are able to put a face to what would otherwise be abstract humanitarian concerns by literally putting those concerns in front of your face. So it's a powerful kind of media, but what makes it so powerful is something called presence. Presence is what happens when your brain is so fooled by a virtual experience that your body responds as though the experience were real. It's what causes your fight or flight response to kick in when you're in a dark virtual hallway and you hear a noise behind you, or when you feel a swell of sympathy for a sweet cartoon creature alone on his birthday, or when you get chills standing in a grand cathedral listening to a virtual choir. Presence is the foundation of virtual reality, and in VR it is the foundation of connection. Connection with yourself, with an idea, with another human, or with artificial intelligence. The International Society for Presence Research took nearly 3,000 words to describe presence, but I'll try to distill it down to something more digestible. Presence is when I'm in this VR headset, I know that I'm wearing technology, but when I'm immersed in an experience, to some level and to some degree, I forget that there's technology involved. As an outside observer, you might not be able to see someone experiencing presence, but what you can see are the physiological and emotional reactions that occur as a result. A great example of this is an experience called RICHIES plank experience. So in this experience, the user starts at the top of a skyscraper, looking at this plank, and I can know for sure that my feet are still on the floor of this library, but my reptilian brain believes that this is really happening to me. And why shouldn't my brain think it's real? It's everything my eyes are seeing. The skyline has depth, and when I turn my head, I can see that the city surrounds me just like the real world would. So when I look down, the part of my brain that cares about survival starts telling me that I should get away from this situation as fast as possible, and my body starts responding accordingly. Aside from being able to make people swear and sweat profusely, why is presence important and how does it help people? As it turns out, something that happens when we achieve presence in VR is that our brains actually become more accurate at encoding memories. There's a study out of the University of Maryland that found about a 9% improvement in memory recall when learning in VR versus learning at a flat computer screen. In another study, a VR startup called Striver found that recall and response times are improved 12% when participants learned in VR. On the surface, those numbers might not seem huge, but in the right situation, that could mean the difference between winning and losing, and in extreme circumstances, that could mean the difference between life and death. For an example of this life or death scenario, virtual reality gives companies and industries a safe environment to practice things that would otherwise be expensive, risky, dangerous, or impossible to replicate. This could be anything from operating heavy machinery, looking at an assembly line in detail without having to stop the line, practicing life-saving surgery, saving hostages, or preparing for Black Friday. The virtual reality training program at Walmart has actually been so successful that since starting in 2016, they've expanded from using it at 30 locations to almost all 200 training centers, and the feedback from employees is nothing but positive. Because of its ability to impact the brain, VR is showing a lot of promise in the fields of cognitive and behavioral therapy. For context, according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, in the United States, an estimated 1 in 5 adults will experience a mental illness or disorder in a given year. This not only impacts their lives, but also the lives of people around them, and it costs $467 billion a year in lost productivity and medical expenses. Research has shown that in a number of cases, VR can actually be an alternative to prescription drugs. Through several techniques such as exposure therapy, distraction therapy, or neurofeedback, VR experiences can be designed specifically to address a host of conditions, including the ones listed here. The counterpart to presence in VR is embodiment. Embodiment is the feeling of agency and control you have in your body. But like presence, it's not something we are typically conscious of, and yet it has an enormous impact on our perception of the world and ourselves. A great example of showing embodiment is the rubber hand illusion. It's a classic experiment to test the idea of body ownership. Volunteers place one hand out of view under a table and set a rubber hand on top of the table. When researchers touch the real hand and the rubber hand at the same time, participants begin to feel as if the rubber hand were their own. Then, once the researcher threatens the rubber hand, the participants respond as if they are at risk of injury. There's great video of these experiments on YouTube, and here's just a couple images from them. On the left you can see there's a rubber hand and a real hand separated by a divider so that this woman can only see the rubber hand. And then in the picture on the right you can see the researcher has picked up a wrench and has struck the rubber hand, and the woman has responded by screaming and pulling her hands back. So with VR, it's possible to do that not just with one limb, but with your entire body. After a few minutes in VR, your brain starts adapting and thinking it's real. For example, a study from the Virtual Human Interaction Lab at Stanford showed that even brief embodiment inside the avatar of an elderly person had a significant impact on their attitude towards the elderly. And embodiment also impacts self-perception. People with eating disorders have a persistently distorted representation of the size of their body. But in a study from 2016, researchers in the Netherlands found that putting people in a healthy-sized avatar helped to decrease the overestimation of their body size and thus improve their body image. Most importantly in this study, the changes stayed for months afterwards. There's still plenty of learning and ongoing work being done with VR and these kinds of applications, but one thing is very clear. Embodiment in VR can induce a level of empathy and understanding that is more effective than any form of communication that we have today, and that's why we're using it across the state.